I think it's really interesting then that Leverkusen are looking at a guy like Farioli, and we get to Erik ten Hag, was an Ajax past as well, and has a very strong connection to Louis van Gaal actually, right? But Farioli is an interesting name. He's only 36. He came he came to Ajax from Nice, was prior to that in Turkey, and has really exploded onto the scene at Ajax, averaging 2.14 points. Again, has given Ajax the same sort of structure that they have been lacking for a long time, plays typical 4-3-3 football. Funny enough, not very Italian, more Dutch, but I actually think this is a fascinating name, Stefan.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Fiorioli is our Farioli. I think I mispronounced the first in there. I think he'd be a great, or not maybe not a great one, but certainly an interesting appointment from Leverkusen. Potentially a great one by all means. But one who's a little outside the box. As you said, he's very quickly made a name for himself in European football. Not just in Holland, but also in France. Some interesting stats I noticed about his time at Nice was that he played a kind of very kind of possession based style of football. His side topped the league on stats for most passes that are most passing sequences, which completed more than 10 passes. They also had the fewest goals conceded, and they were top of so many of the possession based stats. And then obviously Ajax, he's kind of taken that to arguably even higher level in terms of success, playing wide wingers, a kind of double pivot in the middle of the park, but a very strong focus on kind of possession style football, high counter press, developing young players. I think he would tick a lot of the boxes for Leverkusen next season. To be perfectly honest with you, he looks like he's kind of playing a very similar style of football to the way that Leverkusen tried to play under Xabi Alonso. I think he's shown both at Nice and then in Holland that he can be quite versatile with his tactics. He can play at Nice. He had to play a bit more defensively because they weren't one of the better teams in the league. I think they finished as high as fifth under him, which is impressive for Nice. And then obviously at Ajax, they were able to play a far more kind of dominant style of football because Ajax are obviously one of the better teams in the league. So I think he'd actually be a really impressive move for Leverkusen. I think he could be a kind of good step in for Xabi Alonso if they kind of wanted the same or keep the same style of of football, same tactics. Obviously, they're not going to get rid of every player in that squad, so a lot of them will stick around and hopefully be able to continue playing a similar style of football to the one that they've been playing for the last 2 or 3 seasons. So, and along in a number of ways, I think Farioli could be the kind of perfect Xabi Alonso replacement next season compared to all the names that we've mentioned so far today.
Yeah, I guess the only thing is, so he's a former goalkeeper, Stefan, but never played.
Ticks a box for you.
Takes a box for me, yeah, but never played at a high level. And I think, I mean, this is true for a lot of the other candidates too. So, other than Martin Demichelis, who had a very stellar career in Germany and Italy. But I wonder in how much that could be an issue when you're trying to fill the shoes that Javi Alonso is going to leave, who's obvious, who's won everything there is. If there's a trophy under the sun, Alonso has it in his trophy cabinet. So, and I actually, again, I kind of wonder how the players are going to perceive that, unless there is a need for a culture change, right? And maybe more of a direct coaching rather than, oh, here's Alonso and his aura is going to do the job. And I actually kind of wonder how much influence that is going to have in the decision-making process.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because I mean, this was always going to be the case when Alonso got appointed.
Mm,
And by the way, there's a great what if scenario that we should maybe do as a podcast one day, based on if Gladbach had convinced Alonso to join them as their head coach. I think that was what 8 months before he joined Leverkusen, maybe.
mm,
What would have happened at Gladbach? But from day one, Alonso came in. He had that star power. The whole world of European football lit up to see what he was doing at Leverkusen. And but that was a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, he obviously had the star power to convince these players to do what he wanted. He can convince a lot of these players to join Leverkusen in the first place. I don't think without Alonso, Leverkusen sign a Granit Xhaka, Grimaldo, um, a number of the players that they have picked up over the years. Alex Garcia, a perfect example of that as well, obviously, because these are all guys who came and because they bought into what Alonso wanted to do there. But then on the other hand, because he was so kind of dominant in terms of the kind of interest and the buzz around the club, it was kind of like a one man show. And I think at times a lot of people maybe I remember joking that when I was at Leverkusen, people at Leverkusen said he was kind of nicknamed like like Jesus Christ or the Messiah or something like that around the club because he's such a lovely guy, of course, but because it's felt like everything he touched turned to gold, or he could do no wrong, and everyone around the world just had nothing but goodwill for him, and that's obviously wonderful. But it can get in the way. It can get in the way of the way the club want to kind of run things if there's a gravitational pull around the head coach that everyone has to kind of work around to. And while this has been a great success for Leverkusen, I suspect that part of, or at least people in that club, would want to go back to a system where the head coach is just one of many. He fits into their overall system, as opposed to what has been the case under Xabi Alonso, where he's had the influence to exert his own control over that club to a large extent in terms of the signings, in terms of how they do things. And maybe someone like Farioli coming in offers them that opportunity to go back to a previous system where he's just one head coach in a wider structure and he doesn't have a huge amount of pull to, step out of line like Alonso did, both on and off the pitch.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's going to be it's such a weird one to follow up on, right? Um, when you I think this is going to be an issue for any of the head coaches that we have listed. Following up on Alonso is going to be quite a task, and that brings us to the final name, and that's Eric Ten Hag.